Hello students, welcome to Byju's IAS. Today, we are going to start with another very important topic from paper 2, Anthropology optional, that is emergence and growth of anthropology in India. This topic is rather very interesting and some may call it a little complex. Let's understand something that this topic is basically a sum up of all what you're going to read in your paper 2 of the Anthropology optional. So there's a general advice that you finish the various concepts, for example, what is caste system, what are the various studies, what are the various concepts, and on the other hand, we need to complete what is tribal India, the various topics associated with the tribal portion of the Anthropology optional, and then you come on to this topic. Because this topic, we are not going to go into details of the various concepts associated with them, but we are going to have an overview. In this topic, we are going to deal with how anthropology evolved in India, what was the contribution of the various thinkers associated with the studies with respect to tribal India and society as a whole in India. So let's start with this topic, make a note of the various concepts being explained in this topic, and remember that, make a note of the various aspects that have been mentioned in the lecture. Try to improvise by adding certain form of diagrams. There are going to be certain issues because this is very static. You have names of various books. Try to remember as much as you can and try to make a framework in your head when you are dealing with this topic. So let's understand and see what this topic basically entails. See, the anthropological studies in India were an offshoot of the colonial rule. See, there have been explanations as been mentioned by Saran and Sinha and also by Risley. So what those explanations are, on one hand, we can consider them as an outcome of curiosity. Like in the 18th century, the explorers, the Europeans, the travelers who came to India, they studied the tribals, or for that example, studied the various institutions as an outcome of curiosity. Why certain social institutions or practice were being carried out? A sense of curiosity was there. On the other hand, it is said that the rulers to take stock of the position and see how it fared with the people committed to their charge. That means that when the British started ruling India, they wanted to understand the people. So this was another reason. So whenever you come across this question that why or how an anthropology in India started, so just introduce it with two major concepts. First is the word curiosity, and second is to understand the people, because the rulers who came to India were foreigners. In order to understand the practices like caste system or the concept of marriage and various tribal institutions, it was very important for them in order to govern and rule. So first is curiosity, to understand, which basically is associated with European travelers, and second is understand the people in order to rule. So these are the two major concepts that are associated with it. Now, still, we should need to understand that the phases of development of anthropology are still not very clear. So let's understand there are basic two views that are associated with it when anthropology basically started in India. So let's see what are the views. First view basically is like LP Vidyarthi, one of the major or one of the prominent anthropologists, along with many other scholars, traces back the origin of anthropology in India to 1784, the year of establishment of Asiatic Society of Bengal by Sir William Jones. See, like LP Vidyarthi and the prominent anthropologist had said that the beginning, or what we say is the origin of anthropology, started from 1784 with the establishment of Asiatic Society of Bengal, which focused on Oriental studies. That means to gather more information about what Oriental people are or what India or Indian people are, to collect data about them. So they think that this was basically an origin. Then anthropologically oriented people have been collecting data since then and wrote like the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal 1784, the Indian Antiquary in 1872, and later journals. This is one view. Just remember, whenever the origin of anthropology in India comes, this is one view which traces from 1784. But again, there is another view which does not agree with LP Vidyarthi and those prominent thinkers' view, that is given by Gopal Sand. What he says is that the 1784 date cannot be simply said that it marks the origin of anthropology in India. So the opinion that anthropology in India started in the later half of the 19th century, when, according to him, that means when the British administrators like Blunt, Crook, Dalton, Risley, Hutton had started working and did their studies in India. For example, Risley's racial classification. And see, during this time when these people actually started working, Gopal Saran views that this is the actual beginning of anthropology, because study of man as a holistic field started with these people, not from simple establishment of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. See, these are the two basic views that have been presented. Whenever you are writing in the examination, try to bring out these two views very clearly, and only then can you get good marks, and you need to mention the thinkers specifically. Gopal Saran in the second view, and in the early view, LP Vidyarthi, his name has to be there in order to mention when a question of origin of anthropology in India comes. So let's see what are the various phases of development of socio-cultural anthropology in India. Various types of development classifications have been given. One is given by D.N. Manjumdar, where he said one period is a formative period is starting, which is from 1774 to 1911. Then he says there is a constructive phase from 1912 to 1937. Then he says there's a critical phase that is from 1938 onwards. Then LP Vidyarthi has also given his classification of formative phase 1774 to 1919. Then he mentions about the constructive phase 1920 to 1949. Then is the analytical phase about from 1950 to the present times, according to LP Vidyarthi. Now, Basu Roy has actually used the same classification that has been mentioned by LP Vidyarthi. He simply added one more phase, that is the evaluative phase, 1990 to present. So, what we say Basu Roy's classification is being used, we are basically using LP Vidyarthi's classification only, which has been mentioned in very detail in his books, but a simple phase of evaluative phase is added. So, we are basically using LP Vidyarthi with Basu Roy. So, this is an appropriate and contemporary classification which is generally used when we discuss the various phases in anthropology. So, let's move on to the next part, in which we are going to deal with the various phases in detail. First is the formative phase, 1774 to 1919. During this period, ethnographic studies were introduced in India. See, this is a phase in which more focus was given on the studies of the tribes. So this is one of the distinguishing features. Just remember that study of the tribes associated with the formative phase in particular. During this period, the Asiatic Society of Bengal was established by Sir William Jones. As you have already studied, it was focused on the Oriental studies. because the British had established their rule. They wanted to actually know about the people also, so they under the rule of the East India Company. So this was one of the major advancements with respect to the data collection of the people of India. Then an essay of anthropological interest was published in the Indian Antiquary in 1872. Then similar on the lines of Asiatic Society of Bengal, an Anthropological Society of Bombay was established in 1886, which published the first journal. Scholars were posted to different parts of the country to acquaint the government officials with the local population. See, when we were studying the Asiatic Society of Bengal, when I introduced earlier, we mentioned about the Oriental studies. Why? See, when the Britishers came to India, the East India Company was here. They came, they established their political rule. But in order to rule also, you need to understand the society, right? What are the practices? In order to make certain rules also, you need to understand. So that is why scholars were posted in different parts of the country. They used to interact with people to understand what the population is, how the population is, what are their cultural practices. So again, study of man is anthropology. So they indirectly or directly were studying man or the humans of India. The British anthropologists like W.H.R. Rivers and Radcliffe Brown visited India. So now Rivers, again, these Rivers and Radcliffe Brown are one of the very prominent anthropologists. When he came to India, Rivers, he studied the Todas in the Nilgiri region. Now, Radcliffe Brown, another major anthropologist, he studied the Andaman Islanders, the tribes of Andaman. So this is again, these two are very important works that are associated with these two thinkers, and even today they are used as reference. And as you people preparing for the civil service examination, it is very important that you make a note of W.H.R. Rivers, his study with respect to Todas, and what are the various aspects and dimensions he has given. Even with respect to Radcliffe Brown's Andaman Islanders, I think UPSC can very easily ask this question because this question is very important in contemporary times. Also, you need to make a note of the Andaman tribes, quote the study of Radcliffe Brown. That will make or enhance your answer to a great extent and help you to fetch very good marks. So now let's see what were the important works in the formative phase. One of the important works is the tribes and the caste of Bengal in Risley. So Risley is associated with this caste and racial studies. So this is one of the important and the prominent works. The Mundas and the country by S.C. Roy. Now, S.C. Roy is particularly associated with the Chota Nagpur Plateau tribes. Very studied them very comprehensively, and various books were written on the tribes of the Chota Nagpur region. Then the Kochi tribes and the caste by L.K. Ananthakrishna Iyer, again one of the very prominent thinkers and anthropologists. The Journal of Bihar and the Odisha Research Society, 1950. Students, remember, it does become difficult to remember all the names. So what you need to try is, there are two things. First, try to make your notes using the PPT and the presentation that is being, or the lecture that is being delivered to you. Try to revise it again and again. See if there are supposedly 4 names that are mentioned here. Probably you will not be remembering all. If you remember 2 also, you can write them. And the examiner themselves know that it is not humanly possible to remember every book's name and the year. So try to recall as much as you can. Try to revise more. Make your own notes and keep on revising. That will enhance your recalling ability and help you directly to present very good answers. So coming back to the topic, these are the important works associated with the formative phase. Now there are certain other works that were given by the foreign scholars. So like for example, the Khasis, the tribe in the Meghalaya, the P.R.T. Gordon in 1907, the Loshta Naga by J.T. Mills in 1922, the Lushai Cookie clans by J. Shakespeare in 1912, the Chamars by G.W. Briggs in 1920. Again, the same thing applies, not humanly possible to remember all names. Try to remember as many. If you can remember 2, that would be very helpful to you to score very good marks in the examination. Now, having studied the formative phase, now we are coming to the next phase. That is the constructive phase of from 1919 to 1949. See, the major developments took place during this, namely the 2 major developments that took place during this phase were, first is Anthropological Survey of India was established in 1945. Second is Department of Anthropology at the University of Delhi was established in 1947. So these in some form provided a framework or the pillars for anthropology as a discipline in India, or origination of anthropology. Anthropology department was again later established in Calcutta University, and then L.K. Krishnan Iyer and R. Chanda joined the department and started the postgraduate course in the university. So further roots of anthropology were laid down in various parts of India. So now let's see. Under the editorship of S.C. Roy, Man in India journal started. This is one of the very prominent journals. You should always remember S.C. Roy's name and the name of the journal when you are talking about the constructive phase. D.N. Manjumdar, T.C. Das, Iravati Karve, A. and others started publishing on the social institutions. For example, Iravati Karve's work on kinship is very important. 25th Science Congress was held in Calcutta in 1938 with the theme Anthropology in India. Many Indian social anthropologists delivered lectures over here, and discussions formed the basis of further research and further fields in which the anthropological research is to be carried out. So this formed the basis of how the future research will be done. So let's see what were the important works during the constructive period. The Changing Hope by D.N. Manjunath, again one of the very prominent anthropologists in India. Marriage and Family in Mysore by M.N. Srinivasan. The Hindu Method of Tribal Absorption, N.K. Bose. Various Elvin's work on the tribes of Madhya Pradesh and Odisha. And his prominent works include the Baiga in 1939, the Agaria 1943, the Munda and their Gothul in 1947. Just remember, Munda is a tribe and Gothul are the youth dormitories. Where they used to live. See, we have just mentioned the thinkers like D.N. Manjunath and Srinivasan and N.K. Bose. In the later part of the lecture, we are basically going to deal with certain details with respect to each of these thinkers. What were their basic concepts, what views they have presented, what were their basic works, and a little background associated with these thinkers. So this is, as you would see, this is basically a sum up of what concepts you have basically read in the various parts of the syllabus of paper 2. So that is why an advice I had given earlier, try to finish all those concepts, understand those concepts, and then come to this topic. You would be able to correlate them very well. So let's move on to the other important works in the constructive phase. Like Hermann an Austrian ethnologist, wrote various books, a prominent one being The Chenchus, The Jungle Folk of the Deccan, 1943. His work on the Chenchus is very important. Students, remember, question on Hermann has already come in the examination, UPSC exam, anthropology optional, and it has been quite a few years. So that a note of Hermann, particularly of 15 marks or 10 marks, becomes very important for the future examination. 1. And secondly, an independent question on Chenchus can come. And you need to mention Hermann work with respect to Chenchus. That would help you to fetch very good marks. Then coming back to the topic, the Rajgons of Adilabad, the myth and the rituals associated with them, 1948. The Reddys of Andhra Pradesh we're talking about. The Reddys of the Bison Hill and the study of acculturation, 1945. Again, so these are one of the important works that have been done by Hermann. Again, try to understand and read them as much as possible and make a note of them. The analytical phase is the third phase now, 1950 to 1990. See, over here, we see that a transition happens. Till now, when we were reading the formative or the critical phase, the emphasis was basically on the tribal studies. We were reading about works done by various thinkers on various tribes. But now, after 1950, we see a shift. From the tribal study, we move on to the village studies. Do you imagine or the reason behind them? See, before 1950, though India got independent in 1947. So if we take broadly a situation in which just before that phase was a rule of the British, during that time, why tribal study was more important was that it was British psyche, because see, British had focused on the aspect of study of the tribals, first from an aspect to understand the society in order to govern them, but also from the aspect in order to increase the land revenue. In order to increase the land revenue, they had to basically study the tribals. For example, in Santals, the clash between the Santals and the Britishers happened because the Britishers had the aim of making them agriculturists. They were basically tribals. So that is why emphasis on the study from the foreign scholars and anthropologists with respect to the tribals was more dominant at that time. Now, when we got independence, we had already done various tribal studies. They still continued. But to resolve the issues of the rural area, village studies became very important. So we see post-independence, particularly in the analytical period from 1950s to 1990, the village study became another important core in the anthropology with respect to India. So let's understand that. There was a drastic change from the ethnographic work in the formative phase after independence. It became more analytical in nature, as we mentioned. The focus of anthropologists shifted from the tribes to the caste studies and the village studies for sure. See, over here we see from the tribal study to analytical village and the caste study. See, when we study village as a whole, what becomes more important? First is the caste issues associated with them. Then what are the economic systems associated with them? Then what are the political issues? And what are the interrelation among them? So that means when we shifted towards village studies, automatically its components in the form of caste, the economics, the peasant studies, the political issues related to village and all, they became more important. So, and remember, that does not mean that tribal studies had stopped. Tribal studies also continued, but there's certain dominance of certain themes or the paradigms that keep on arising. So we will mention and associate the analytical phase with more of village or the rural studies, in which these dimensions had a very important role. The renowned anthropologists such as Morris Hopler, Oscar Lewis, David Mandelbaum came to India from America to study the Indian society and culture during this period. So let's see, in the further development in the analytical phase, D. N. Manjuldar in 1950 established the Department of Anthropology at the Lucknow University and the Eastern Anthropologists General. Even today, Lucknow University has provided a platform for various anthropologies for the research. So Lucknow University is one of the major centers for the development of anthropology. Contact between the Indian and foreign anthropologists occurred towards this. So let's see what were the important works that were associated with it during the analytical phase. See, L.P. Vidyarthi develop the concept of sacred complex. See, again, the concept of sacred complex, we have already dealt with them in the previous chapters, so just give a brief. See, sacred complex is, if I put it in very simple words, the site of pilgrimage has its importance, and using this in order to study India as a civilization. And what are the various intricacies associated with this concept is basically dealt in the sacred complex. See, why it is sacred, how it is, has already been dealt, what are the importance of sacred geography, the sacred practices that are taking place. These are all associated with this topic. We have already dealt, so we are not going to go in detail in this topic. So, but simply an outline has been given this, so you need not mention them in detail in your answers also, because the answer is about the analytical phase, not about sacred complex in specific. Now, Marriott in 1958 developed the concept of network and centers to understand the civilization holistically. See, what sacred complex meant for LP Vidyarthi, network and centers are an extension of the topic. I'll just explain in brief. For example, we have 12 Jyotirlings in India. Now, every point, every Jyotirling, let us assume, can be a center. That center itself is a site of pilgrimage and can be associated with the concept of the sacred complex. Now that is a center, that is a node, but various Jyotirlings are also linked to each other. They have a cultural commonality between them, right? So that is a network that is being formed. So this is the concept of network and centers that were given by Marriott. It is an extension of the concept of sacred complex. Why it is sacred? Because, so this was a concept basically given by Marriott, network and centers, which has been explained and as an extension of the sacred complex concept given by L.P. Vidyarthi. M. Srinivasan, in his book Social Change in Modern India 1965, developed the concept of Sanskritization. Now, the concept of Sanskritization, again, is very important with respect to the social study of the culture of India. It basically means that the people from the lower caste try to mimic or adapt or incorporate in themselves the practices of the upper caste in order to show that they belong to the upper caste, in order to help them socially mobilize themselves to the upper caste. So that is a way of social mobility among the caste that has been done. So we again will not go into detail in this topic, which has already been covered in the previous chapters. So let's see what are the other important works during the analytical phase. See, social anthropologist D. N. Manjuldar, S.C. Dove is again particularly very important with respect to the village studies. B.K. Roy Burman, Makhan Jha's various study with respect to the marriage, family. P.K. Mishra, K.S. Singh with respect to caste studies. T. N. Madan, N.K. Bose, T.C. Das, Iravati Karve's kinship studies. She's Iravati Karve. Then Chattopadhyay Mukherjee for the most notable contribution to the village and the community studies during this phase. So let's move on to the next part, the fourth part, the evaluative phase from 1990 to the present. See, we saw that during the previous phase, the focus was on the village and the rural studies, in which we had association with caste, the economic aspect, the political issues associated with it to a certain extent. Now, when we see in the evaluative phase, the anthropology became more applied. That means it diversified itself into various other aspects. Let's assume that a book that is written by N.R. Shett's work on the social framework of the Indian factory. So you are basically trying to analyze the condition of the workers with respect to the modernization in the factories and how the condition of the people are influenced by the work culture and all. That means you are diversifying from simply confining yourself from tribal village studies. That means we moved on from that aspect to various dimensions like urban anthropology. We started moving towards medical anthropology, and so the branches increased. They diversified. That is the phase of evaluative phase. That means we extended our branches to the other aspects, and that is why this phase is very important. Now see, the new fields emerge in social anthropology like urban anthropology. Urban is people living in the urban areas. What are the various dimensions associated with it? Like, for example, family, marriage, economics. See, like they would be studying, has the concept of joint family diminished, or what are the impacts? Whether the marriage as an institution exists in the urban areas or not, or whether these new institutions that are coming up, like the live-in relationship, are they a part of marriage or not? What are the economic systems? How are they different from that of the rural areas? So the new dimensions came up in the evaluative phase. Similarly, the growth of Indian anthropology in the areas of medical anthropology, religion, development and psychological studies, tribal development studies, studies in the ethnic identities, folklore studies give prominence. See, very important is psychological studies. You would often come across when we see that in the urban areas, people are having various mental health issues, various diseases, like people in the mid-30s and 40s are getting heart attacks. Why is it happening? How is stress associated with it? It is basically a study of man. So these dimensions themselves gain a lot of importance. So this was basically the important part during the evaluative phase. Now see, the other were complex segments like caste politics, caste power relationship with the social structure was studied by social anthropologists. See, during the analytical phase, when they studied the village, they were studied as caste. What is caste? How are caste, various castes in a village? But there was certain limitation with respect to the studies. But when we come to the evaluative phase, we have 1990s as an era in which the concept of reservation for the people came. So people started using reservation in order to get into the services with respect to government service, and various other dimensions of reservation and caste issues came up. So there were interest from the anthropologists to study how power and caste are associated with each other. So prominent thinkers like Rajni Kothari, A.R. Desai, so thinkers like them, even Guha, these thinkers studied this relation in depth and used to tell them why certain things are happening, why, how, and why castes are associated with politics. So the relationship in the social structure became very important as being present. So it's very important when you mention the caste politics and the power and caste relationship, you should mention these thinkers in detail, and so that will add as a value addition to your answers and help you to get good marks. Sociology and anthropology were very close during this phase. See, study of caste and village studies is very closely associated with sociology. So anthropology also became very close to sociology, and certain overlap also happened because see, overall anthropology is a study of man. So we have to study caste and village studies and various dimensions that are already in sociology. So there was a quite overlap during this phase because both the disciplines were doing research in the socio-cultural aspects of tribal, rural peasants and the industrial societies. So let's see in which we will deal with the development of physical and the biological anthropology in India. So with respect to the physical and biological anthropology in India, we see in the 19th century, attempts were made to study the physical features of the tribal through anthropometric data. See the various measurements, like for example, cranial index, nasal index, these various measurements were used in order to study the tribes and their characteristics. J. Schrott was the first person to conduct the anthropometric study in the Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu in 1968. You should mention these two terms in particular because this would give you an edge over the others and a value addition to the answers. Captain Drake Brockman worked on the castes and tribes of Uttar Pradesh and published his result in 1896. He basically mentioned about the various castes that are present, what are the caste relations between them, what are the various tribes that are present in Uttar Pradesh, and his research study was published in 1896. So let's come on to the important work that were done in the field of physical and biological anthropology in India. During the 1930s, biological anthropology utilized the human genetics. Now see, entry of human genetics was the one that transformed the physical and biological anthropology to a whole, because new fields came up with respect to whether the study using the blood groups, human serology, and various dimensions with respect to identification of parents and all, the various dimensions in anthropology open, like human serology, they study and various studies issues related with blood serums. The physical anthropologists were engaged in the racial surveys, anthroposcopic measurements, the ABO blood group system that you will do in the physical anthropology in detail, surveys, and dermatographic studies. This is associated with the fingerprints, which is basically unique for every individual. Then we come on to H. Risley gave the racial classification of the Indian population on the basis of anthropometric survey. Now let's understand this. When he was carrying out his survey, he had various options towards him, which all parameters he should rate. He basically took two major parameters. One is the cranial index, and second is the nasal index. These are the two anthropometric parameters that were used by Risley for his classification. He even first had in mind, should color be taken as a measurement for classification of the races, but he said due to various interpretings, color cannot be taken as a proper quantitative anthropometric measurement in order to classify the races. So these are the two that were used by Risley. Then D.S. Guha carried out racial survey of India as a part of the census of India in 1934. Now let's see the development of physical and biological anthropology after 1960. So we see that the subject became specialized and problem-oriented, how to find the solutions. See, as I said, though genetics was introduced in the previous 1930s, after 1930s, genetics became important, but over here became more applied. Like number of studies reported the gene frequencies of one or more traditional genetic markers in the Indian population, some patterns in average gene frequency in a group of population defined by geography, language, ethnicity, occupation. See, basically genetics was being used to identify and classify various characteristics of the population in India. If we see, it is because of these genetics that we even have the out of Africa theory, which says that from Africa, when the people migrated, they came to India. And from India, they went on to the other regions, Europe and other various countries. So this has been possible because of the genetic studies that were taking place. So it's very important you can quote this as an example. A few studies have attempted in studying different populations using genetic and anthroposcopic markers at regional and the local level. So this was basically this is associated more with genetical studies, correlation, and the differences between various segments of the societies. Now let's come to the growth and development of prehistoric or archaeological anthropology in India. See, this basically begins with the Archaeological Survey of India being established in 1861. Its efforts are limited to historical period for the initial decades, but later on, it transformed itself to study holistically in the various dimensions with respect to humans as a whole in India. Around the same time, several scholars, usually geologists and civil servants, began the probe into the remains of prehistoric man. Two among them were J.D. Newbold, who found the Neolithic ash. Neolithic period is associated with the food production phase, so it's very important with respect to the prehistory study. But over here, let's come back to the topic. We see that the Neolithic ash mounds are found in South India, so this became really very important. H. Lee Mesurier discovered the Neolithic ground cells near Jabalpur. So these were very important archaeological evidences that were found during the early phases. So please try to remember these names. When you're writing your answers, please try to incorporate them. Now, the formative phase of the Indian archaeological anthropology began with the year 1863 when Robert Bruce Foote discovered the stone tools of the Paleolithic period from Pallavaram. Foote reported his findings before the scholars and published the academic journals and tried to reconstruct the life of prehistoric period. See, Robert Foote is basically the father of Indian prehistory because of his discoveries. Whenever you're mentioning about the growth and development of archaeological anthropology in India, this name, if not present, will definitely lead to penalizing of the marks in the examination. You should mention his name very clearly and his discovery, and make sure that you at least prepare 1 or 2 pages on Robert Foote, because there is great possibility of him being asked with respect to what is the contribution to Indian archaeology. So please prepare a note on Robert Foote. So let's move further in the topic. In 1922, the prehistory was made a component in the Department of Anthropology in the Calcutta University. See, then very important was the Yale-Cambridge expedition. See, this is basically associated with Deep and Patterson, who were called to India in order to investigate the various issues that were being faced in the prehistory. If we study the Paleolithic period of the Western countries, in particularly the lower Paleolithic period, there is proper coherence and various phases are present. But when we came to India, the phases we were not able to identify the various phases. So Deep and Patterson were basically called. They went to the Potwar region, and based on the glacial studies, they tried to correlate the various phases of the Paleolithic period in India, and in coherence with what had been done in the Western countries. So this Yale and Cambridge expedition in 1935 is one of the very important topics that you need to mention with respect to the prehistory in India. They carried out the work in Kashmir Valley, Kashmir and the Potwar Plateau, the Narmada Valley also in Madras coast. They obtained evidences of the Paleolithic culture from the Soan in the Potwar Plateau in the Himalayas, along with the scheme for fourfold glaciation in the Himalayas. So basically, in the Western countries, the glaciation periods were there. They actually use the same thematic to have the various phases in India. And Deep and Patterson were the major two people associated with them. Even from India, D. Sen was the one who helped them and worked with them in this phase, which I'm going to study now. D. Sen from the department took part in the Yale Cambridge expedition along with D. Pera and Patterson. A very important, these two people. You need to mention them whenever you are writing about the prehistoric archaeology question. Made the expedition immortal to the annals of prehistory. According to Mishra and Nagar, 1978, first excavation of Paleolithic deposit was carried out by Calcutta University at Kuliana in Mayurbhanj in 1948. So this is the brief development of archaeological anthropology in India that we have studied. Now let's move on to the further topic, that is with respect to the important works in the archaeological anthropology that have been done. Appointments of H.D. Sankaria, one of the very, very important archaeological anthropologists in India, or simply you can say a very prominent archaeologist in India, is a professor in 1940 in the Department of Archaeology at Deccan College. And R.E.M. Wheeler, as the Director General of ASI in 1944, are also significant. There were various students of H.D. Sankaria. V. N. Mishra worked on the excavation. Malki Nagar worked on ethnoarchaeology. Yoshidal Matpal worked on the Kevad. Students, remember, there's a great probability of a question being asked on H.D. Sankaria, his contribution to archaeology as a whole. So when you are going through this lecture, try to make a note of at least for 15 marker on H.D. Sankaria and his contribution. See, we are going to deal with H.D. Sankaria in the later slides, but when you are going through it, just make a point that certain thinkers are really very important. See, we would be reading a lot of thinkers when you're going to do this lecture, but there are certain thinkers which occupy a very important place with respect to UPSC examination. He is one of those thinkers, so just be careful about that. And let's come through the various important works, other important works of archaeological anthropology. See, R.E.M. Wheeler put a new life to ASI. He trained the Indian archaeologists who made important contributions. Among them were S.R. Rao, very important. Excavation of the Harpan sites in the Rothal and the Rangpur. Next is B.V. Lal. Excavation at Hastinapur in UP. Excavation of the Mesolithic sites in Birampur in the Burdwan district. P.K. Thapar. Excavation of the Chalcolithic sites of Prakash. So again, these were very important works that were done during this time. Let's read about the other works. D.N. Manjumdar wrote a report on the human remains excavated at Null in 1929 and Mohenjo-daro in 1931 and 37. Very important works. You should mention them. Krishna Swami in 1938 did similar studies in Madras. K.R.U. Todd in 1939 wrote a short account of the Paleolithic sites in Paleolithic industries of Bombay. Malki Nagar opens the framework for prehistory culture. Sequence was established by 1945 due to the various excavations that were done, particularly with D. and Patterson and the work of Manjumdar, Malki Nagar. So Malki Nagar basically tried to say that by 1940, due to the various researches carried on by anthropologists like D. and Patterson and D. and Manjumdar and various other scholars and anthropologists, the issue of Paleolithic culture and the sequencing was somewhat sorted out by 1940. So this helped in the proper organization of the archaeological anthropology in India as a whole.